David Harris, a 49-year-old senior engineer, had spent 16 relentless years building the backbone of TechVault Solutions. From the first days as a young, eager programmer to now a director in cloud infrastructure, he had watched the company evolve from a fledgling startup into a tech powerhouse. Every late night spent debugging, every weekend devoted to refining systems, every sleepless night preventing security breaches had been a part of his life, a labor of love, dedication, and loyalty. He had believed, perhaps naively, that loyalty and hard work would eventually earn recognition. That belief shattered one crisp Tuesday morning. It started with a simple request, something David considered modest, reasonable, even almost polite. He wanted an 8% raise. Not extravagant, not outlandish, just fair compensation for 16 years of unwavering dedication. He walked into the glass-walled office of Claire Donovan, the company's 37-year-old CEO, whose presence alone seemed designed to intimidate. Her perfectly styled blonde hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights, her expensive designer suit a symbol of a new generation of tech leadership that prized youth, energy, and buzzwords over experience. She didn't even glance at the leather folder David clutched, a folder brimming with documented evidence of his contributions, innovations, and systems he had single-handedly developed. "David," Claire said, her tone dripping with mockery, "at your age, we need hungry young talent, not expensive legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches." And then that laughter, a sharp, echoing burst that ricocheted off the glass walls, punctuating every word with derision. David felt the blood drain from his face. His accomplishments, 16 years of personal sacrifice, were dismissed in a heartbeat. The projects he had architected, the cloud migrations that had saved the company millions, the security frameworks that had thwarted sophisticated attacks, all rendered invisible by one wave of a dismissive hand. He stood frozen, clutching his portfolio as though it were the only shield against her scorn. David remembered the nights in server rooms, the endless debugging sessions, the times he had missed his children's milestones to prevent TechVault's billion-dollar systems from collapsing. Claire, with her Harvard MBA and polished presentations, had no conception of what it took to keep a company of thousands running seamlessly. "Listen, David," Claire said, her tone sliding into that rehearsed tone of managerial concern. "You're good at what you do, but you're expensive. We can hire 2 fresh graduates for the price of 1 senior engineer. That's just business. Nothing personal." Nothing personal. David felt a fracture inside him, a quiet yet irrevocable crack forming in his sense of self-worth. For 16 years, he had believed in fairness, in merit, in the idea that experience was an asset. Now he realized it was treated as a liability. And in that moment, the seed of a plan began to form. If the company, if Claire thought he was replaceable, then perhaps it was time to see what happened when the architect of their systems decided he wasn't available. He returned to his corner workspace, the so-called open office that tech culture touted as innovative, though it was nothing more than a sea of standing desks filled with 20-somethings in hoodies tapping away at laptops, while the company's critical infrastructure ran on systems he had built years before. David's eyes fell on the small leather notebook he had kept for years, filled with algorithms, threat detection models, cloud optimization frameworks, all developed in his own time, with his own resources. These were not company projects, at least not legally. Every line of code, every experiment documented meticulously was his personal intellectual property. As he flipped through the pages, a new clarity washed over him. Claire thought she was in control, that she could dismiss him, underestimate him, treat him as obsolete, but she had no idea how integral he had been to TechVault's success. And now he had the leverage she never anticipated. He picked up his phone and scrolled to a contact he had saved but never called. Scott Mitchell, VP of Engineering at TechFlow Solutions, TechVault's biggest competitor. A man who valued experience, who understood that wisdom could not be replicated by youth alone. His thumb hovered over the call button. 16 years of restraint, of loyalty, of being the invisible engine behind a thriving corporation culminated in this singular moment. He pressed dial. As the phone rang, the hum of the office around him faded. Outside, the early morning sun glittered across the bay, indifferent to corporate games. Inside, a quiet storm had begun. One call would change everything. One conversation could alter the course of his life and perhaps the fate of the company that had dismissed him so casually. And little did Claire Donovan know, this was the moment when the dismissed senior engineer would begin orchestrating a quiet, calculated revenge that would shake the very foundations of TechVault. David Harris walked back to his corner workspace after making the call, the office buzzing around him with young engineers typing frantically on laptops, their faces lit by the glow of screens, oblivious to the storm brewing in one of their senior colleagues' mind. For 16 years, David had been the backbone of TechVault's cloud infrastructure. Every late-night server fix, every weekend experiment, every algorithm that predicted threats before they materialized, he had built it all, yet it was invisible to Claire Donovan. Her laughter from that morning still echoed in his ears, a stark reminder that loyalty and experience meant nothing to her. But now, armed with his personal notebook, he had the power to change the game entirely. That notebook wasn't just paper and ink, it was David's private laboratory. Every line of code, every security protocol, every machine learning model, every cloud optimization framework, meticulously documented with dates and development notes, was his creation, developed on his own time, with his own equipment. These were the projects he had brought home, tested and refined during lunch breaks, weekends, and long commutes. Over the years, the company had implemented many of these innovations, sometimes taking credit, often failing to recognize the genius behind them. Today, David realized that the most valuable assets of TechVault, the algorithms and systems keeping clients safe and profits high, legally and ethically belonged to him. He scrolled through his GitHub account, hundreds of commits in repositories organized with surgical precision, threat detection algorithms that saved millions, weekend home experiments, cloud optimization frameworks that earned TechVault awards, core models built in his garage lab. Every major innovation had originated as a personal project. For years, he had shared his work freely, out of loyalty, trusting that his contributions would be recognized. That trust had been met with dismissal, ridicule, and an underwhelming offer of an 8% raise. But now, every piece of code was a weapon, every commit a strategic advantage. He dialed Scott Mitchell's number, the VP of Engineering at TechFlow Solutions, the company that actually understood the value of experience. Scott's voice was warm, professional, and unhurried, a stark contrast to the corporate monotone David had endured for years. "David Harris," he said, "I think it's time we had that conversation." There was a pause, a barely audible intake of breath, then genuine excitement. "I've been waiting for this moment. Are you ready to discuss opportunities where experience is valued?" David felt a subtle thrill, a rare combination of relief and anticipation. Around him, the open office hum continued, oblivious to the seismic shift about to take place. The young engineers were building tomorrow's technology on foundations that David had designed years ago. Now he was about to leverage those foundations for himself, for his family, and to finally assert the respect he had been denied. Within days, David presented Scott with his notebook, each page meticulously detailed, each algorithm time-stamped and annotated. Scott's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages, impressed not only by the technical complexity, but by the legal clarity and thorough documentation. He immediately recognized the value. These weren't just ideas, they were the core of TechVault's security infrastructure. David's innovations accounted for more than half of the company's competitive advantage. Scott's excitement was palpable. This is comprehensive, and to think TechVault never formally acquired this? Over the next 2 weeks, they structured an offer that reflected both David's expertise and the true value of his personal projects. TechFlow would provide a senior engineering director position, oversight of an experienced team, a salary far exceeding his previous compensation, and crucially, proper credit and ownership of his intellectual property. It wasn't just about money, it was about recognition, respect, and control. David spent the evenings carefully copying every email, document, and record that demonstrated his prior contributions, creating an ironclad evidence trail. Every Slack message where he had guided colleagues, every technical document shared across departments, everything supported the case that his work was legally his own, and the company had implemented it without formal acquisition. He didn't just want to leave, he wanted to leave with clarity, precision, and the satisfaction of finally being in control of his destiny. That night, David gazed out at the San Francisco Bay from his office window. Lights reflected on the water, the city moving on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The morning's humiliation had evolved into an opportunity for calculated retribution, not out of malice, but out of justice. The young engineers, the flashy offices, the buzzwords, and the MBA certificates were irrelevant. Knowledge, experience, and strategic patience would be his allies. And David knew as he closed his notebook and prepared for the next day that once he stepped into TechFlow, Claire Donovan would begin to realize far too late that the engineer she had mocked was about to become her fiercest competitor. A silent storm was coming, and it would dismantle everything she thought she controlled. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of TechFlow Solutions, glinting off the sleek, glass-walled offices. But for David Harris, the gleam of the city outside could not compare to the fire burning inside him. His first day as senior engineering director had arrived, and he was about to step into a role where experience was not just respected, it was demanded. 8 engineers waited for him in a conference room, their ages ranging from 38 to 52, seasoned professionals who had spent decades mastering the kind of complex systems most companies barely understood. This was his team, the people who could finally turn his vision into reality without having to justify every decision to a dismissive, youth-obsessed executive. As David introduced himself, outlining his approach to cloud security and advanced threat detection, he sensed something he hadn't felt in years: genuine respect. No patronizing nods, no rushed glances at watches or phones, just attentive eyes and engaged minds, hungry for guidance, yet confident in their own expertise. He could see the difference immediately. This was a team that understood that true innovation required the combination of experience and creativity, not blind enthusiasm. Every plan he laid out, every strategy he described, was met with thoughtful questions, insights, and even constructive challenges. Here, he wasn't just giving orders, he was collaborating, guiding, and inspiring. Meanwhile, back at TechVault, the echoes of his departure had barely begun to ripple through the company. Claire Donovan, blissfully unaware of the depth of the storm she had triggered, continued to schedule meetings, assign projects, and ignore the very systems David had built. The younger engineers, the flashy new hires she had championed, were now struggling to maintain the infrastructure that David had designed over 16 years. Within hours of his absence, glitches appeared, minor at first, then more serious, as legacy protocols were mismanaged, misconfigured, or ignored entirely. What had seemed stable, foolproof, and sophisticated in David's hands now showed cracks under inexperience. David, at TechFlow, began methodically implementing his advanced threat detection algorithms. These were the same algorithms Claire had mocked as outdated thinking, built in his garage on weekends and meticulously refined over years. Now fully recognized and legally protected, they were about to prove their true worth. The systems could detect vulnerabilities hours before they were exploited, predict attack patterns with staggering accuracy, and optimize cloud operations to unprecedented efficiency. His fingers moved across the keyboard, reviewing logs, running simulations, and pushing his team to reach the highest standards they had ever seen. Every success was both satisfying and vindicating, proof that years of experience could outperform raw energy any day. Back at TechVault, the first signs of panic began to surface. Security alerts were missed, scheduled optimizations failed, minor breaches which David's systems would have intercepted in seconds now required frantic emergency responses. Claire Donovan's phone buzzed incessantly with warnings, messages, and reports of internal failures. The company newsletter, once a source of pride, now carried rumors of internal instability. Analysts began to notice the change. For the first time in years, TechVault's reputation, carefully cultivated under her leadership, was at risk. David's revenge, however, was not rooted in cruelty, but in precision. Every step he took at TechFlow was deliberate. Documentation, legal protection, team alignment, and transparent processes. His focus was clear. He would not merely leave TechVault, he would outpace them, outsmart them, and prove the value of experience in a market obsessed with novelty. Each successful implementation at TechFlow was a direct challenge to the arrogance that had dismissed him, a quiet but powerful message that age and expertise were assets, not liabilities. As weeks passed, his team achieved milestones that TechVault couldn't hope to match without him. Processing speeds improved, false positives dropped dramatically, and predictive threat detection reached levels previously thought unattainable. David's algorithms, once dismissed, became the gold standard in the industry. Meanwhile, emails, calls, and even attempts by Claire Donovan to negotiate consulting opportunities were ignored. David had learned a lesson he would never forget. Respect is earned, and if it's denied, opportunity must be taken elsewhere. Late one evening, David sat alone in his new office, overlooking the city lights. The quiet hum of servers below mirrored the calm determination within him. He reflected on 16 years of loyalty that had been met with mockery and dismissal. But those years had not been wasted. They had been investments, compounding knowledge, skills, and innovation that he now held fully in his control. A small, almost imperceptible smile crept across his face as he realized the truth. The very systems Claire had taken for granted were now driving TechFlow's unprecedented success. But the real test was yet to come. Claire Donovan had underestimated not only David's abilities, but the ripple effects of his departure. The next time she tried to intervene, she would discover the full scope of what she had lost, and David's revenge, precise, justified, and unstoppable, would begin to reshape the industry in ways she could never have imagined. The days at TechFlow were electric. Every morning, David Harris arrived at his office with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The sunlight reflected off the chrome edges of his new corner workspace, but it wasn't the view that energized him. It was the knowledge that he was finally in control of his own destiny. His team of senior engineers, each hand-picked for their experience and dedication, waited for him every morning with questions, ideas, and the drive to implement the complex systems that David had spent decades perfecting. These were not eager but inexperienced juniors. These were battle-tested professionals who understood the stakes and the precision required. Together, they were a force Claire Donovan had underestimated. Meanwhile, back at TechVault, the cracks were widening. The company had always relied heavily on David's innovations, yet now they faced the consequences of undervaluing him. Minor malfunctions escalated into system failures, delayed updates, and security alerts that were mishandled due to inexperience. Claire's confident demeanor, the one that had laughed at his request for a mere 8% raise, was slowly cracking. Meetings she attended were filled with confusion and panic. The young engineers she had hired, bright but untested, struggled to maintain the systems David had designed, realizing only now the depth of his contributions. Every missed alert, every failed update was a silent testament to the value she had mocked. David, aware of the power he held, acted with methodical precision. Every decision, every deployment at TechFlow was documented and tracked, ensuring that the intellectual property he had fought to protect remained legally and ethically untouchable. He wasn't acting impulsively, he was orchestrating a quiet but undeniable form of revenge. The algorithms he implemented could detect vulnerabilities hours before they became threats, optimize cloud processes to peak efficiency, and predict attacks with near-perfect accuracy. Each success was a message, a reminder that experience was irreplaceable. One evening, David sat back in his office chair, reviewing reports of TechVault's struggling systems. The irony was palpable. Systems that had once been flawless in his hands now faltered without his guidance. Claire Donovan's name appeared in a series of emergency emails, each more desperate than the last. Attempts to patch the failing infrastructure were futile. Without David, the core of their security framework was exposed. Yet David's revenge was not about watching them fail. It was about creating a world where expertise and loyalty were finally recognized and valued. News of TechVault's deteriorating performance began to leak into industry circles. Analysts noted unusual delays, missed security updates, and a drop in client confidence. Contracts that had seemed secure now faced scrutiny. Meanwhile, TechFlow began quietly attracting attention as David's team deployed their enhanced systems, outperforming every metric that TechVault had boasted about. It wasn't flashy marketing or empty promises. This was real, measurable superiority built on skill, experience, and respect for the craft. David's mind often drifted to the morning that Claire had laughed at him. That memory, once a source of humiliation, had transformed into a driving force. He no longer felt anger in the conventional sense. It was something sharper, a strategic clarity that made every action deliberate. Each successful deployment at TechFlow was a direct counter to her dismissal. Each improvement, each patent filed in his name, was a subtle declaration that she had miscalculated. The company she led, which had once seemed untouchable, was now vulnerable, and the architect of its downfall was someone she had scorned. Late at night, David sometimes thought about the collateral effects of his departure. He knew that some senior employees at TechVault would be laid off, and the thought weighed on him. But he also recognized that loyalty should never be one-sided, and his actions would ultimately create opportunities elsewhere. TechFlow had already begun hiring experienced professionals displaced by age bias, ensuring that the expertise lost at TechVault would continue to be valued and rewarded. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice and restructuring, showing the industry that experience could not be ignored. And as he closed his laptop and watched the city lights shimmer on the bay, David knew that the next move would shake the very foundation of TechVault. Claire Donovan had underestimated the quiet strength of experience, and very soon the consequences would become undeniable. What she had mocked as outdated, expensive, and not necessary would now define the future, and David Harris would ensure she never forgot it. The morning at TechFlow began quietly, deceptively calm, but David Harris knew the storm he had set in motion was about to break over TechVault. His security systems, the ones Claire Donovan had mocked as relics of the past, were now operating at full capacity. Threat detection algorithms identified vulnerabilities hours before they could be exploited. Cloud optimization frameworks streamlined processing and reduced operational errors. Every deployment was a silent victory, a reminder of the value Claire had ignored, the expertise she had mocked, and the dedication she had dismissed. David had turned his humiliation into power, and the results were impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, at TechVault, chaos simmered just below the polished surface. The absence of David's guidance was palpable. The younger engineers, brilliant yet inexperienced, struggled to manage the complex systems he had meticulously crafted over 16 years. Emails piled up with emergency alerts and urgent requests for intervention, all coming too late. Claire Donovan, once so confident in her dismissal of David's 8% raise request, now sat in her office staring at screens filled with failure notifications. Panic replaced her previous arrogance. Every missed update, every minor breach, every client complaint was a manifestation of the oversight she had made when she laughed at loyalty, experience, and wisdom. Back at TechFlow, David reviewed progress reports alongside his senior engineering team. Efficiency had increased by 35%, false positives had dropped by 60%, and predictive threat detection achieved accuracy levels previously thought unattainable. Each success fueled his team's morale and reinforced his decision to leave TechVault. More importantly, patents were filed in David's name, crediting him properly for the innovations he had developed on his own time. For the first time, he wasn't just respected, he was recognized. Every line of code, every algorithm, every protocol bore his signature, a testament to the years he had devoted to innovation. David's satisfaction was not purely personal. His mind remained focused on the wider consequences of Claire's arrogance. TechVault's reliance on his intellectual property had been absolute, and their underestimation of his departure was catastrophic. Contracts that had once seemed secure now faced scrutiny. Clients questioned the integrity of security systems. Analysts noticed performance dips and reported on unusual instability within the company. The headlines were subtle at first. TechVault faces operational challenges. Senior staff departures raised concerns. But as the days passed, the story became undeniable. TechVault's reputation, carefully curated under Claire Donovan's leadership, began to unravel. Yet David's revenge was measured, calculated, and ethical. He did not sabotage systems or leak sensitive information. His actions were rooted in the careful implementation of systems he had developed legally and independently. He ensured that TechFlow's deployment of these systems followed all legal and ethical standards, securing both his work and his team's contributions. Every improvement, every successful deployment sent a quiet but unyielding message to TechVault: dismiss experience at your peril. Underestimating a senior engineer who had been the backbone of your infrastructure was not just arrogance, it was folly. Late one afternoon, Claire Donovan finally called. The tone was a mixture of panic and disbelief. She had come to realize that her dismissal of David Harris was no longer just a personal miscalculation, it was a strategic blunder. The systems she had mocked were now driving TechFlow to outperform TechVault in every measurable metric. Every email she sent and every call she made was a desperate attempt to regain control, to salvage a situation she could no longer influence. David, calm and composed, listened politely, but he did not return her pleas. His revenge was not in the conversation, it was in the undeniable results. TechVault was crumbling under the absence of its most valuable asset, and the consequences were far-reaching. As David ended the day, he reviewed the latest metrics and reports from TechFlow. The company's performance continued to climb, client trust increased, and the innovations he had fought to protect were now fully credited to him. Claire Donovan's attempts to intervene were futile, her power diminished, and the consequences of her earlier arrogance played out in real time. David knew that the final chapter of this reckoning was about to begin, and the next wave of events would not just reshape TechVault, it would send a clear message across the industry. Experience and wisdom are not commodities to be mocked, and loyalty cannot be taken for granted.
The morning air in Palo Alto was crisp, carrying the subtle hum of a city always awake, always moving. David Harris sat in his office at TechFlow Solutions, the soft glow of his monitors reflecting determination in his eyes. Today was not just another workday, it was the culmination of months of precise, deliberate strategy. Every system, every algorithm, every team member's effort had been orchestrated to this point. The core of TechVault's empire, the very systems Claire Donovan had taken for granted, now belonged legally, ethically, and operationally to TechFlow. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably, and David was about to witness the final echoes of the reckoning he had engineered. In the conference room, his team of 8 senior engineers gathered, reviewing the latest performance metrics. Predictive threat detection had reached a staggering 94% accuracy. Cloud optimization frameworks were operating at peak efficiency, processing workloads faster than ever, reducing errors and false positives by more than half. David felt a quiet satisfaction as he observed their discussions, not the restless, uncertain chatter of untested juniors, but confident, informed exchanges grounded in years of expertise. They had not only implemented his systems flawlessly, but had improved upon them, demonstrating that experience combined with collaboration could achieve results no flash-in-the-pan trend could match. Meanwhile, back at TechVault, Claire Donovan's world was collapsing. The The company's stock had plummeted by 47% in the past quarter. Layoffs targeted senior staff first, and the media had begun publishing case studies highlighting the dangers of undervaluing experienced professionals. Every emergency email she sent, every desperate meeting she called, was a reminder that her dismissive laughter had initiated a chain reaction she could no longer control. Clients were reconsidering contracts, vendors were cautious, and her carefully curated reputation as a visionary leader was being scrutinized in real time. David's absence, his legal protection of his intellectual property, and the superior systems at TechFlow were a triple blow she had never anticipated. David's revenge was not personal in the conventional sense. It was precise, justified, and industry-altering. He had not sabotaged TechVault, he had simply reclaimed what was rightfully his, implemented it properly, and created an environment where experience and wisdom were respected. Emails from industry publications began arriving, requesting interviews about his innovative systems. Venture capital firms contacted him, eager to license his threat detection technology. For the first time, David's work received the recognition it deserved. Every line of code, every protocol, every security framework he had developed was credited to him, legally, ethically, and publicly. Claire Donovan attempted to intervene one last time, calling David repeatedly, offering consulting opportunities, equity packages, even CTO positions, anything to regain control. David did not return her calls. Her pleas, motivated by panic and loss rather than genuine respect, were irrelevant. She had underestimated him, undervalued his contributions, and dismissed loyalty as irrelevant. The lessons were clear. Experience matters, intellectual property cannot be ignored, and dismissing senior professionals carries consequences that echo far beyond a single paycheck. Weeks later, TechVault filed a lawsuit against David, alleging theft of intellectual property and breach of fiduciary duty. The case collapsed spectacularly when David presented meticulous documentation proving the algorithms and systems were developed independently, on his personal time, and legally protected. Not only were TechVault's claims dismissed, but David was awarded legal fees, with the judge explicitly noting the company's failure to respect and secure the work of its senior engineers. The verdict was more than legal vindication. It was public recognition that experience, dedication, and intellectual property matter, no matter what a dismissive CEO might say. In the months that followed, David implemented the Experience Matters initiative at TechFlow, hiring displaced senior professionals from across the industry, providing retraining, consulting opportunities, and flexible work arrangements. Within a year, applications from experienced professionals increased 400%, proving that the market valued wisdom when it was properly recognized. TechVault, stripped of its most talented personnel, continued to decline, eventually declaring bankruptcy. Claire Donovan resigned under board pressure, replaced by a veteran executive who understood the irreplaceable value of experience. As David stood at the podium to accept the IEEE Lifetime Achievement Award, looking out at a room filled with gray-haired engineers and young developers collaborating side by side, he reflected on the journey. The laughter that once humiliated him had become the spark for an industry-wide transformation. Loyalty alone was insufficient. Self-value, strategic action, and courage to demand respect were essential. Age was not a liability, it was a competitive advantage, a reservoir of knowledge, and a force capable of reshaping industries. And somewhere in Silicon Valley, a CEO learned a lesson she would never forget. Dismissing experience comes with consequences. The algorithms were running. David's name was on the patents. His work belonged to him. And the quiet, precise revenge that began with a rejected 8% raise had transformed not just his life, but the lives of hundreds of professionals and the future of an entire industry. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is not in anger, but in reclaiming what is rightfully yours and letting the results speak louder than words ever could.